welcome you to the first Soul Repair Center webinar for this program year. Our focus today is attention to moral injury in the initial curriculum of each of the three chaplaincy programs. I'm Nancy Ramsey, Director of the Soul Repair Center, which is located at Bright Divinity School on the campus of TCU in Fort Worth. I welcome you to our webinar series that is co-sponsored with Volunteers of America Shea Moral Injury Center, which is directed by Dr. Rita Nakashima Brock, a Senior Vice President for the VOA and the founder and former director of the Soul Repair Center. Welcome to this program year. We'll begin by looking at initial chaplaincy training in moral injury in each of the three chaplaincy programs. Today, our speakers will help us understand each school's curricular priorities for this initial education in moral injury. We'll learn initial strategies for equipping new chaplains to respond to those describing or reporting effects of moral injury. We'll learn and compare the content and sequencing and priorities for the initial training and the rationale. And we'll discuss ways the programs assess student achievement in each of these skills, as well as subsequent courses for this topic. So we are giving attention to how the curricula of the three chaplaincy schools attend to military moral injury. Our presenters are Commander Ron Kennedy, who serves in the U.S. Navy as the Deputy Director of Training at the Naval Chaplaincy School, Newport, Rhode Island. Commander Kennedy has served in the U.S. Navy for 19 years. He deployed with the Marines to Iraq, where his battalion engaged in the assault on Fallujah. He also served on the USS Nimitz and subsequently in support of Operation Enduring Freedom in Kandahar, Afghanistan, and with the U.S. Navy in Busan, Korea. Prior to his military service, he served in foreign missions in Russia and Kazakhstan on behalf of the Churches of Christ. Major Douglas Lumpkin of the U.S. Air Force serves as an instructor and director of the Operations Division at the Air Force Chaplain Corps College located at Maxwell Air Force Base in Alabama. He has deployed in support of numerous operations to Afghanistan, Iraq, and other locations during the global war on terror. Chaplain Lumpkin is an APC board certified chaplain, holds a doctorate with a specialization in traumatic injury from Assemblies of God Theological Seminary. He is ordained in the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. He also serves as one of the DoD's moral injury subject matter experts. He develops curricula and workshops for U.S. Special Operations Command and as the instructor for the U.S. Air Force's moral injury course during basic chaplain training. Colonel Mark Lee, chaplain U.S. Army, began his service as the Dean of the Army Graduate School September 8th of this year. Previously, he directed the CPE Center at Brooke Army Medical Center in San Antonio, Texas. He holds a DMin and PhD and certification in ACPE and BCC. Chaplain Lee previously served as Chief of Theater Spiritual Resilience as the U.S. Army Europe-Africa headquarters in Wiesbaden, Germany. He also served in South Korea and deployed twice in Iraq. Prior to his service in the Army, Chaplain Lee served as senior pastor of Community Church in Honolulu and concurrently as a chaplain in the Hawaii Air National Guard. He holds a PhD from the University of Aberdeen, Scotland, a DMin from Erskine Seminary, and an MDiv from Princeton Theological School, and an MBA and BS from the University of Southern California. In addition to our speakers, our program is assisted by the expertise of Sam McAllister, a VOA production staff colleague. The chat monitor is the Reverend Kyle Fauntleroy, a retired captain U.S. Navy Chaplain Corps and one of the directors at the development staff at Bright. Please share any questions you have for our speakers at the chat, which Kyle will monitor and share with me. We will do our best to assure that your questions are addressed. The structure of the webinar will proceed in this way. We'll first hear from each of our three speakers, and then have about 15 minutes for them and for me to talk with each other. At the top of the next hour, I'll begin to share your questions for them as Kyle Fauntleroy sends them to me. We decided that given the fact that this is the 75th birthday or anniversary of the Air Force, that Major Lumpkin will begin with our presentation. So Doug, we turn the program over to you.
Thank you so much. I would like to start. Let me get a PowerPoint up here real quick. And good day to all of you. It's good to have all of you here, and so glad that we can chat with you a little bit about the work that we're getting to do in terms of the Air Force and where we're finding moral injury in our ranks, and how we can help folks to take care of both the folks that they serve and as well as themselves. So if I get a thumbs up, if you can see the slides, okay. Very good. All right. So what I want to do here real quick is just walk through where we have inserted moral injury training into the Air Force Chaplain Corps schoolhouse programming. So if you take a look here, one of the things to understand about the Air Force in particular is we don't get a lot of days to do formative work with our chaplains. We only have 58 days to formally train them, all the way from when they first join and put on lieutenant, all the way up through their time as a colonel through retirement. So with that very limited time frame and very limited window, we have a lot of things that we just have to teach them over the course of time and the years. And because moral injury is now coming more to the fore, about 3 or 4 years ago, we identified that we needed to get that into our curriculum. And so we inserted it originally right here in our basic chaplain course. And during that time frame, I was one of the ones who developed this. We have some other chaplains that teach it as well. But there's a couple objectives that we have that we want to work through during that. First is just an awareness of the topic. In particular, there's this great quote that I like, that basically it says that combat reliably produces moral injury. And there's something about that I'm not sure that our folks coming in from the field understand how much this is going to be a part of the work that they are doing. As you all know, because moral injury has been so focused for years and years on military context, we understand the associations with that. But if you're coming into the field, you may just not necessarily know how much of moral injury underlies pretty much a majority of the work that we do. If your eyes are open and your ears are listening, there are moral consequences and moral questions that are underlying nearly every conversation that we have. And whether folks are dealing with those things in an appropriate way and making good moral decisions, or whether they are struggling, or they have two right answers that they're trying to pick from, or maybe two wrong answers that they're trying to pick from, that the moral foundation of the work that we do is just very complicated and very difficult. And so one of the things that we want to do is just bring a real awareness to the topic in the first place, that morality, we kind of swim and we live in this idea of morality. The second thing we want to talk about is just the prevalence in the military, and how much it impacts, especially our folks who go overseas and serve in combat locations, but then also in other formats in the military in terms of military sexual trauma. We, in fact, yesterday had a conversation with one of our folks who's doing some work on adultery and the moral issues that are associated there. Obviously, we serve a huge medical community as well. And so as more and more research comes out post-COVID on the moral injury items that affect our military, or excuse me, our medical community, we're seeing it there as well. One of the other things that I want to transmit to our chaplains, and these are our very earliest chaplains, are folks that are just lieutenants, maybe have just put on captain, but this is the course that they're going through to become worldwide qualified. One of the things that Brett Litz talked about in his 2009 paper was this benevolent moral authority. And one of the points that I try to make for our folks as they're walking through is that just by the nature of putting on the uniform and having a religious symbol that is also associated with the uniform, they are a moral authority out the gate. Just walking into the door, anytime they come into a room, anytime someone comes in for counseling, they are a moral authority. They've been granted that status and place just because of who they are, the training that they have, and the position that they've been given. But what they don't necessarily have off the bat is that benevolent sense that I want them to have when they're thinking about and when they're dealing with moral injury. it's easy in many religious traditions to think that by having all of the answers, that the answers should be easy to obtain. But as I'm sure all of you know, the life well lived is a life full of figuring out where the black and white things start to fall apart and where you live faithfully inside of the gray. And so I challenge them to walk out and to take up that mantle of benevolence. They'll have the moral authority. That's part of who they are and where they've come through. But to be benevolent is a whole nother case that they need to embrace as they are sitting with folks, as they are doing really what most of us would just consider good counseling work, is that non-judgmental space that we create so that people have an opportunity to talk about the very real and difficult things that they might be coming through. The final issue that I try to work on is some potential misconceptions that I think especially brand new chaplains coming into the field may not necessarily understand. And I've got a slide here that I use in our training. And if you take a look at this, what I've tried to represent in pictorial form here, up in the top right-hand corner is what I call the bang, where the action of combat is typically associated to be happening. And from outside of there, you've got varying levels of degree of the places where people have proximity to where the incident, where the combat is actually occurring. And there's this thought process, especially for folks who haven't seen moral injury a lot over the course of the years, that those folks that are closest up there in that top right-hand corner to the bang, that somehow because they have that real and raw exposure to that moment of combat, that they are almost necessarily going to have some psychological issues or some type of issues that impact them because they have been so close to the action. And then as you move out to each successive layers, what we find is not only chaplains, but also leaders believe that as you have this increased sense of security, as you move farther away from where the actual military action is happening, as the proximity reduces, that somehow there are less psychological consequences to the fact that you've participated in war. Anyone who has sat with folks who have gone through moral injury know that doesn't necessarily hold up. And in fact, it often doesn't hold up. Maybe up in that top right-hand corner, we see a lot of the fear indicators that you would get associated with PTSD. But as we're thinking about moral injury and we're moving from a psychological framing to a spiritual framing, our proximity to where things are happening, our sense of safety, do not necessarily dictate whether or not we will be impacted by the things that we've been asked to do by our country. And those complicated moral decisions can happen just as likely all the way over on the far left-hand side as they can there close to the battlefield. So in the Air Force in particular, some of the folks that I think about here are particularly our RPA troops. So those are the folks you'll often hear called drone pilots, but remotely piloted aircraft. Also intelligence troops, people who by all means are very, very safe from the actual combat itself because they are so far distantly located from it. But at the same time, there seems to be something about the participation in that combat that is incredibly morally complicated. And I attribute it to a couple different things. I think the power differential that is associated with being so far from the combat is actually something that we have to process in a moral realm. I think that when we reduce the intimacy, for instance, I know the first time that I deployed overseas, my outlook on the conflict changed because I was there in the place observing things and witnessing things and being a part of exactly what was going on. But then when you pull back all the way back to home station and you spend the day maybe operating an aircraft remotely, and then you clock out at 5 o'clock and you go to your kid's soccer game, and these worlds of war and combat start to mix with the worlds of home and family, it just becomes incredibly more complex. And I find that there's a lot of grace and a lot of opportunity for the people that are closest to the bang. But what happens is as we get farther away, there's this expectation that people will not suffer any sorts of consequences from combat because they have been moved away. And I just don't think that holds true specifically with moral injury. back to our training and the places where we insert. So I mentioned we've got this 90-minute lesson is all that we have available to get chaplains spun up on moral injury. But the problem with that is, well, actually, we originally stuck it in that location because I was doing just kind of informal surveys, and I was asking around the room, how many of you here have heard of moral injury? And the answer was very few 4 or 5 years ago. But now what we find is that folks are coming in from their graduate studies with some idea of what moral injury is and where it came from and what's happening. So we may not need to necessarily be doing that initial exposure and that initial understanding as much in our basic chaplain course. And so over the course of time, I do believe that we'll begin to shift this into some other locations farther down the line where people maybe have some experience, some boots on the ground time before we go back and examine this content in a different way. One of the things that we're doing right now, because we only have that first entry level in the basic chaplain course, is we are also offering trainings and workshops and webinars at different points throughout the years where rather than someone coming to the schoolhouse to be trained, we're trying to figure out how to get out to them to train, especially in more complicated locations, say our RPA folks, our special operations folks, our intel troops, places where those moral decisions have to be made more frequently, and we're targeting. We've got a couple of SMEs throughout the field attempting to work in those areas, and we go and we try to find ways to bring new and latest research to them, talk to them about how they might use assessment tools in their confidential counseling, and other ways that they can just be better counselors, and then also how they might be able to develop some moral injury interventions as well that could be useful. The format that I've developed, and this is one that I've used over and over again, both with our basic chaplains and as we go out on the road show, is to just take these 4 simple concepts. And this was something that I use when I try to teach this, because chaplains have to have something that they can grab onto right now and work with today. So re-examining, where we're talking about our deployment or our experience, whatever that might be with trusted friends. Reframing, to consider that story from different angles, especially with a group, and ritual, where we explore deeper meaning and commemorate, and then reconnecting, that purposefully engaging in the community. What I found is that as I was studying and trying to figure out the psychological aspects of moral injury, as I was trying to think about the spiritual aspects of moral injury, these were kind of the big areas where things were landing over and over again. And so when I go to chaplains and I encourage them to develop interventions, for instance, all they have to do is just take one of those areas and they can immediately grab and run with some content or some item where they can make a tangible difference in their unit today. So for instance, when you think about re-examining, you can gather people together and just have them tell their war stories. And all of a sudden, we are doing processing for moral injury. We think about ritual. When people returning from deployment, we can add, specifically, chaplains can be there to add rituals that help to explore that meaning and for people to commemorate what has happened in that transition from becoming a person of war to a person of peace as they re-enter their community. And then also reconnection, right? Any opportunities that we have to partner with other organizations to just get both our military members and our families re-engaged in this community that it seems like in our military world, we are so often picked up and dropped from place to place to place. And so figuring out how to purposefully reconnect our people back to the communities that they're serving so that they feel that understanding that these people are there to care for them and to love them and to take care of them, and that this job that they have taken on for their country and is meaningful in a larger and broader context. And so that's some of the items that we're doing here at the Air Force Chaplain Corps College. I look forward to answering your questions here in a little while, but thanks for an opportunity for us to share today about what we're tackling from this end.
Thank you very much. Let's move ahead now and hear from, Commander Kennedy.
Thank you, Dr. Ramsey. Thank you for putting this on and focusing on this important topic. It really is significant. Sam, would you be able to put my slides up?
Ron, it's possible that Sam's run into a little difficulty. Maybe you could begin and he'll catch up with us.
Absolutely. Okay, got it. I think he just. Oh, yeah, he said he didn't receive them. I think maybe they didn't get to him. So let me just go through this. I had a slide deck, and it starts out basically with defining what war is. So really, we're talking about focusing on what we call the basic leadership course for chaplains. We have them in this course in phase 1 for 5 weeks. So there's not a particular lesson that we talk about moral injury, but we fold it into basically a larger portion of larger lesson on care. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. We start out with the quote. It's from Clausewitz, and he writes this: "Everything in war is simple, but the simplest thing is difficult. These difficulties accumulate and end by producing a kind of friction that is inconceivable unless one has experienced war." So we try to frame it for our new students. And the pictures that I put in my slide deck, there's one of a ship that's going down in World War II, and there's another one from the Battle of Fallujah. My battalion, when I was just out of school, just out of BLC in 2004, went to 1st Marine Division, and we deployed right away. And we ended up being the main effort for the Battle of Fallujah Part 2, called Operation Phantom Fury. We ended up losing 33 Marines and earned over 545 Purple Hearts. It was a brutal fight. So it's something that's near and dear to my heart. Since then, our battalion, since 2004, we've lost about 30 to suicide. So this is something that weighs on me, and it's an important topic. So the next quote that I have is it's from the Navy Chaplain Corps, and here's how we're starting to revise all of our courses, from the advanced leadership course to the intermediate leadership course to the basic. The basic, we're in the midst of rewriting that right now. We start with the end in mind. The end is this: the goal of what we do as chaplains and our religious program specialists are enlisted that help us is to achieve what we call spiritual readiness. Now, readiness is a topic that military we're used to hearing about readiness as far as aircraft, ships, machinery, people. One thing that's been lacking a little bit in the Navy, not as much in the Marine Corps, but in the Navy, has been a real focus on spiritual readiness. And this is how we define it now. Spiritual readiness is the strength of the spirit that enables the warfighter to accomplish the mission with honor. And that's really the kind of the North Star, the end state of what we do. Everything we do as chaplains and RPs now is really focused on spiritual readiness. Now, as we go back and we revise our curriculum, that's going to be kind of the center of everything that we do is going to be focused on that definition. Again, spiritual readiness is the strength of the spirit that enables the warfighter to accomplish the mission with honor. Now, this is broad in the sense of, if you're a person of faith, it makes a lot of sense. But as chaplains, we're there for everybody, whether it might be a different faith or someone who doesn't really have faith at all. So for the folks of other faith, we steer them toward their religion, their faith. And for those that are not, maybe we steer them toward philosophers like Stoics. So that's really the focus of this. We understand that the humans are made up at the center of who we are as the soul. Sometimes that's hard to convince some people. Understand that. What we've started to do with our revision of our BLC class, as we talk about care, and I just want to say that we have 4 core capabilities in the Navy as chaplains. We provide, we facilitate, we care, and advise. We provide for our own, that's faith specific. We provide for our own, facilitate for others, and care for all, regardless of faith or lack of faith. So in that understanding, in the BLC course, when we talk about pastoral care or care in general, that's really where this fits in. Moral injury is important, and it's a key part, a key facet of our new curriculum. As we focus on spiritual readiness, we want to communicate to the chaplains. And if I wish I had my slide, I wish I was able to. I thought I sent my slides. I probably got the wrong email address. But if you imagine four concentric circles, right, in the center of the center of the circle of who we are, it's kind of an anthropological view of mankind. We have the concept of divine. The concept of divine is in the center, regardless of your faith or what you believe in. If you're a believer, it's pretty easy to understand. The concept of divine, you can either believe that God exists or he doesn't, but that's in the center, the soul of who we are. On the outside of that, the next circle is a worldview. The center, the concept of divine color is our worldview. It also has an impact on ethics and values. The last circle is institutions, right? So in the center of what we do as chaplains and RPs is we really focus on the soul. That fits in again to that concept of spiritual readiness. We talk about readiness in many facets. In the Navy now, we're really getting to the point, especially in BLC, where we're emphasizing spiritual readiness that's actually been defined by the Navy. So everyone will start to understand that this is a really important part, not just the physical aspect of being ready, not just the mental, but also the spiritual aspect as well. So as chaplains and RPs, one of the biggest responsibilities that we have is to prepare Marines and sailors and Coast Guardsmen for the rigors of war across the conflict continuum. That's really at the heart of what we're doing in our revision. I think back to some of the experiences I had in Iraq. We had a situation where we had a sniper. It was the middle of the night. I got a call from our battalion commander to come to the combat operations center. We had a sniper who had spotted somebody digging on the side of the road. Now, there's only a few reasons why you would dig on the side of the road. We had been there for 7 months at this time. We were getting hit by IEDs continuously, the roadside bombs. So this was a rare. We'd never catch them. So this was a rare moment for us. He asked for permission to take the shot, and he did. He got permission to take the shot. He missed the shot, which was rare for this Marine. The spotter told him to stop. The spotter recognized it was a little child, and this was a long shot. So they sent out some Marines to see what was going on. While on the side of the road, this little girl, her cat was hit. So she was burying it at 2 a.m. I guess it was the cool of the night. So she was burying it where it died. The next day, my CO looked at me and I was like, "Sir, I'll be there." So the next day, I spent quite a bit of pastoral time with that Marine who was really having a difficult time, thinking that he just almost killed a child. That was tough. So in the midst of the actual Battle of Fallujah, there were a lot of close calls. It was intense, and it's like the quote from Clausewitz. It's inconceivable unless you've been in the midst of combat. So we want them to understand that as chaplains and RPs, we are there for them in these key moments. We also focus on part of our instruction under care, but we talk a lot about confidential communication. For chaplains and RPs, for chaplains in particular, we have what we call ironclad confidentiality. They can tell us anything. So it's messy in war. So to have the ability that the Marines and the sailors know, that if they're struggling with something morally, they can talk to us regardless of the situation. They know no matter what they say to us, it's going to stay with us. That's that confidential communication. That's why it's so important. That's really where we are at BLC. As we revise it, we're focusing on helping instilling this concept of spiritual readiness to our new chaplains and our RPs. I think the most difficult thing for them to wrestle with as new chaplains is that care part, is when you hear that unbreakable, that ironclad confidentiality, that you mean they can tell us anything. Because you have to understand, most of the folks that are coming from into the Navy, whether background religion, they are religious ministry professionals that are required reporters in some instances. Now, to capture this idea that no, it's not your information, this belongs to the service member, sometimes a little bit of a struggle. But that's really what we focus on now for BLC, to prepare them to deal with moral injuries. Now, you mentioned the fact, not just the moral injuries in others, but what do you do when you come back with moral injuries yourself as a chaplain, or as you come back as an RP? The good news is, I think we do a fairly good job of instilling that in our basic course. When you're struggling with something, you can talk to another chaplain, maybe not your supervisor, but you can talk to another chaplain with that same confidentiality, and you can share, get things off of your chest as well. So that's important. But one of the things that I found out that was interesting when we returned from war, when we got off the bus, I looked to the people on my right, and there were some family members that were holding babies that our service members would never see. So it's that survivor guilt, and that is follow-on care that we do focus on here. So I just wanted to end with that concept. That is something that sometimes we don't talk about as a moral injury in a sense, but survival guilt is real. And that concludes my portion. Pending your questions.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And now, Colonel Lee.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity to be with you this afternoon or morning, wherever you are, to share with you some of the things that the Army does. First, let me explain why I'm in my USC shirt. I am on leave, so I am here in Seattle at the University of Washington, and not at USC, but I'm at to drop off my daughter for her third year in college, and so I am out of uniform. But I'm proudly representing my alma mater, University of Southern California. So I will get some ugly stares around here today, I'm sure. But let me just share with you, I am the Dean of the Army Graduate School, which is relatively new. We're only about 3 years old. And the Army Chaplain Corps decided to create a graduate school to oversee, create, and manage professional development courses like our moral injury, combat medical ministry, as well as to have under one auspices the organization to oversee our clinical pastoral education program, as well as our family life program. So let me share with you my slides so that we can have a bit of an understanding. And so our graduate school is it's established differently because we recognize that the school that manages the PME, professional military education, and the ongoing professional development education need to be managed different and set apart differently. So we have created 2 different schools within now what we call the U.S. Army Institute for Religious Leadership. And I'm trying to figure out where am I? Okay. I'm not sure why all of the slides are not coming in. So when our chaplains enter, the chaplain candidates as well as chaplains who enter the Army for the first time, they enroll in chaplain basic officer leadership course, which we call Chabolic. And it is during this time when they are basically what we call greened. They learn all of the basics of becoming an Army officer and an Army chaplain, which have some overlap as well as some differences in terms of how we operate and work within the Army setting. So during this part, it is an introduction to the military setting. So they go through the initial military training for basic officership that's required of all officers entering the Army. So they receive very much similar training in that portion. And then they, of course, learn the customs and courtesies and what it's like to operate as an Army officer. And then we get into the different phases of particularities of the chaplain corps. So not only are we learning what it means to be a battalion chaplain and brigade chaplain and at different echelons above that, we're also learning what it means to provide religious leadership and religious support in large-scale combat operations. Nowadays, what we call LISCO, looking at particularly the European front and the Indo-Pacific areas. And within that course of time, in which they had the initial military training and then the different phases in which they're learning about chaplaincy within the Army, they get a course in short-term counseling and pastoral care. And the instructor or the SME, the subject matter expert in that particular course, can be a marriage and family therapist. So in the Army, we have what we call family life chaplains who go through the LMFT program, and they can be licensed marriage family therapists operating out in the various garrisons. So we have a SME who is a licensed marriage and family therapist or CPE trained chaplain that teach this part of the curriculum for the basic course. And that is a 40-hour block of instruction, which also includes things like solution-focused therapy, some basics of CPE in terms of active listening and non-judgmental, non-anxious presence as chaplains that are going to be serving with soldiers and families. And in that, we also cover what we call the pastoral care for moral and spiritual injury, as well as trauma-informed care. So this is, again, an introductory course in which our brand new chaplains and chaplain candidates are going to get an introduction to what it means. What is moral injury? What is the difference between PTSD and moral injury? How do they look? How do they differ? How are they similar? As well as some trauma-informed care. So they're really getting an overview and an introduction to all the various ways in which chaplains are often called to provide care for families and soldiers. So again, this is a 40-hour instruction block in which the SME comes in and provides that. That is all they get, and it's a 12-week course, and it is divided into 3 phases. And again, as I said, all of our active duty, reserve, and National Guard chaplains, as well as the chaplain candidates, must go through this course. And so there is a bridge or a gap which we've identified. So like I said, in the tribolic course, the focus of moral and spiritual injury is very basic and it's introductory. It is about short term. It is really a surface level understanding of the topics and what are some of the symptoms, because there are some symptoms that are very similar. They overlap. Of course, they can be independent of one another or dependent on one another. And so we are really educating our chaplains in the basic course what to look for, what to listen for, and how they might provide short-term intervention and care, and then also know when to refer. One of the important things that we teach in our basic course is the importance of referrals, knowing the limitations of our chaplains, especially at battalion level, who really don't have an in-depth training or understanding of many of the counseling or moral injury specific issues. So part of the ongoing development, which is what the graduate school that I'm in charge of is responsible for, is to continue to provide educational opportunities for our chaplains and our religious affairs specialists and NCOs who are going to have some experience in battalion or even a brigade and higher. And after their experiences, having graduated from their basic course and having gone to the first unit of assignment or subsequent assignments, we offer the military moral injury course, which is through the graduate school. This is a 40-hour course, which we offer. That's a lot more in-depth. There are people, again, who come from their first assignment as a battalion chaplain or a religious affairs specialist to brigade or even higher as a division level chaplain or religious affairs specialist, religious affairs NCO. So in this course, we go much more in depth looking at the similarities and differences of PTSD and moral / spiritual injury. And I'll explain a little bit about that little split that we have there. And also, we really take a deep look at what is moral injury, what are the different definitions of moral injury, and who can get moral injury. There are also differing opinions out there in the academic world in terms of people actually pulling the trigger, people who are dealing with secondary or tertiary effects of combat and other things like that. And then, of course, one of the important things is that we, as I think my counterparts in the Air Force and the Navy have talked about, the importance of ritual. Ritual is very important. So we actually go through a ritual, have people create rituals, and we talk about how that is an important part of working with moral injury and helping people through their moral injury. And also importance of community, particularly a community of faith, but just community in general, and how it is so important, a vital factor of helping people through their moral injury and hopefully into healing. Again, as I talked about before, in this particular course, all chaplains and religious affairs specialists are welcome to sign up for that course. We don't have a limit in terms of the rank or years of service. It just tends to be, of course, they have to have graduated from their basic course. That's the key thing. And we also invite, oftentimes, if there's room, we do allow for our sister services chaplains to sign up. So in the past, when I've taught it back in the 17 and 18 timeline, we've had Navy chaplains, Air Force chaplains, numerous Air Force chaplains, and their enlisted counterparts sign up for our classes. What we do in this particular course is, again, it's kind of the in-between. It's not a basic introduction. So we're looking at really the theoretical framework and practical things that the chaplains can provide for their soldiers as they provide care for those who are dealing with that. And then, of course, we also give them practical tools and ways in which they can collaborate. And we're really encouraging collaboration to work with behavioral health officers, our psychologists, psychiatrists, and social workers. So in the Army, we have a lot of different examples of successful collaboration with our behavioral health officers, in which we're working with them in tandem to provide care, particularly when we know that it could be PTSD with moral injury often, or just moral injury, and that's been proven to be very successful. I think that's really it for me, so I will stop my presentation there and open up for questions.
Mark, I think what we'll do is all of us rejoin and let folks ask their questions to you in that context, if that's all right with you. You're muted at the moment. Here we go.
That's fine. Yeah.
Great. First of all, thank you all very much for those initial presentations that helped to demonstrate some of the real differences and continuities in what you're presenting. One of the striking differences that emerged from the presentations was a real difference in the amount of time that you are able to allocate. And it appears, I may get this wrong, but it appears that the Army, you have a 3-week course, and then you have, it looks like a 40-hour course in the grad school, but I lost track of when that second course would happen.
All right, so first of all, during the basic course, the Tribolic course, moral injury is part of the 1-week-long course in which they cover several different topics of counseling and spiritual care. So moral injury in the basic course doesn't receive a whole lot of time. I think it's basically an 8-hour block. So then in the moral injury course itself, that is a course that's available to anybody who's in their unit, basically, right? So after the basic course, anytime after that, they can sign up for the moral injury course. And we have that available for all the components, Reserve, National Guard, as well as other sister services if we have the room. And it's also for enlisted and officers.
Right. That's helpful. And we'll come back to that. But let me see if Doug and Ron want to basically answer the same question, the amount of time. And I think there's more than one opportunity in some cases to address it.
Yeah, so for us in the Air Force, so like I said, we just had that real basic introduction at basic chaplain course for about 90 minutes, and then we do workshops and road shows as people are available. So one of the things that I think is a little bit different about the Air Force system is that generally speaking, chaplains work for other chaplains for really the majority of their career. And so what would happen is then our chaplains at the individual bases would make contact here with the schoolhouse or one of the SMEs and bring in people to do work in particular. And so I run, for instance, a 3-day workshop. I run a 1-hour Zoom webinar, run a 1-day workshop. So really just trying to figure out what is the best format and usefulness for individual types, because obviously folks who are sitting in the missile field have a very different need or understanding for moral injury education than perhaps maybe our special operations folks or folks in other career fields. And so it can really make a difference depending on which chaplains we're working with at that time and what the particular mission set is for their base.
But I think my notes show that there's about 58 days where there are opportunities for training. Did I get that right?
Well, that's 58 days for all schoolhouse formal training. That is all we have to form chaplains in the United States Air Force. So it's we really depend on that graduate school education. And we're also a bit of a stickler for that, having ministry experience before they come into the field, because they need to be fully formed and ready to hit the ground when they get there. But like I said, once they do get out to their bases, chaplains tend to work for chaplains for the most part. And so there is a senior chaplain there to walk them through different aspects of their ministry as they're working through out on the bases.
Ron, how about you? Can you just somewhat remind us then of the amount of how much time is included and over a period and what period of time, just to summarize that?
Yeah, it's actually part of our basic course, and it's part of a lesson. It's part of the care portion of the class. So there's not a lot that we focus on as far as moral injury. We do deal with it. We also deal with it again when we discuss it's actually two courses when we talk about confidential communication, how important that is for the service member to know no matter what is on their mind, they can talk about it. There's someone they can talk to. There's also two other things outside of what we call our formal courses. We also have what we call professional training courses once a year. All chaplains and religious program specialists go through it annually. Now, the topics vary, but this could be definitely a topic that we do focus on. This year is actually going to be on pastoral care. So I think that's probably going to be a portion of this. Also, we have area-wide training monthly. And that's something, again, at the schoolhouse, we kind of manage that as well. So that could actually be something that's pushed out to the fleets as well.
Thank you. I appreciate that. One of the helpful questions that someone sent me earlier was the ways in which your training um, invites chaplains, new chaplains, or at any point, to be reflective about their own experiences of moral injury. And if could you quickly talk about that? Not quickly because it's unimportant, but just that we have about 8 minutes to go before we shift to responding to other people's questions.
Well, I'll jump in. For the moral injury course that we run in the Army, the week-long course, we do have a portion where we ask people to reflect on their particular experiences of combat and other places in which they might have experienced moral injury. So we do have that in our course.
And what's the context? Are they just in a classroom with other folks, or could you say a little bit more about that?
It's during that moral injury course, that week-long course where we offer through the graduate school. When they attend that, there is a portion in which they are asked to reflect on their moral injury. And so then there's also a part where it's kind of like CPE-ish, where we share with one another what's going on and what we're thinking and feeling about that experience.
I would say for the Air Force, I'm very upfront and honest that my research here is me search in terms of moral injury, and I tell some narratives about some really complicated things that I've experienced. And because these are basic chaplains, they haven't actually been on the ground yet, and so using some real vulnerability to say that this is something that as we sit with people in their pain and in their trauma over the course of time, you can't just walk away from that unimpacted, that we carry people's moral burdens with them. And so that this is really something that impacts us in a way that is unique and in a way that is real and challenging for anyone who's deeply involved in the work of chaplaincy.
Ron, how about you?
Yeah, I think it's one of the things that we do instill in our intermediate course for O4s and our ALC for O5s. The fact that we really train them as supervisors to take care of their junior chaplains and RPs, and this is one way so they don't have to come to you. You can be proactive and be decisively engaged as a leader, especially if you know the deployment, you know what they went through, to ensure that they have someone they can talk to. That's important because a lot of times when you come back from a extended combat exposure, you're numb and you're not really sure what you feel. So that's one of the, I think we instill that in our leaders. Not so we don't talk about to the BLC students, but we do talk about to our O4s and O5s that supervise others. Look for them. That's part of your care for your people. Make sure that you get them connected to other people. A lot of what we do as chaplains, because of our confidentiality, we're the conduit. Sir, I think you mentioned it. That hey, by the way, go Trojans. What we do is a conduit for resources. And we do mention that to our BLC students, but we reinforce it with the ILC and the ALC that as people come to you because of our confidentiality, you need to know when to refer. It's really important. So it's same as for our supervisors. We just tell them, hey, look out for your chaplains and your RPs. Make sure that you connect them and they know that there's someone there for them. For me, it was easy. I had a regimental chaplain and a division chaplain that they took care of me when I returned from my deployment. They did.
One of the things that we've talked about on a number of our webinars is the difference or the fact that there is at the same time, or that there are different forms of moral injury in terms of it might be something that receptive moral injury, that is, that's caused by someone else's action, or a gentle moral injury. And I'm wondering the ways in which you equip chaplains to perceive that, to help discern that and respond appropriately. Any of you?
I'll jump in here real quick. So this is a topic I've thought about a lot. because I think it's that receptive and both that there is some agency and there is some reception in every moral injury. And rather than it being so much one or the other, that it's so much on a scale of trying to understand. And even people that have clearly had something done to them, and a third party disinterested person would say, no, that was done to you, because it's in a moral realm. There are all of these feelings that are associated. Well, maybe I did something, or maybe something I did, I could have changed X, Y, or Z. So we see this with survivor's guilt all the time, right? Someone who wasn't on a mission because they took off a day, 4.5 months ago, the brain will work in mysterious ways to say, I should have been there instead of that person. And so I think it's much less of an either or much more of a spectrum, and just encouraging our chaplains to just be there in that moment with that person, and not trying to assuage any guilt that they may have immediately. That is a tendency that I think that we have, is to go ahead and allow people to experience the full breadth of feelings that are there. And then whether that leads you into, I am the agent who committed a moral wrong, or I have received something that's a moral wrong, allowing the place for both of those things to come and to develop, so that you can walk with that person where they're at with that particular item, and giving them space to maybe reframe it in the other direction if they haven't given time or consideration for it.
Ron?
Yeah, I remember one of my COs when I was with the CBs, the kind of construction workers for the Navy. We were in Afghanistan at the time, and he was reflecting on something he was really struggling with. He sent some CBs out on a mission. It was a legitimate mission. He sent them out, and during that mission, they got hit by a roadside bomb and lost a chief. Right. He still struggled with that. Now that's, I think, part of, as we unpack this, we're most of the chaplains that we get are religious meeting professionals anyway. They're pretty savvy at differentiating between these. Not all, but most of them are pretty sharp. They're sharp enough to know when to help someone sort something out. When is it something guilt that something they're responsible for, or is it something that happened to them, or they had no choice, they were doing their job, in the sense of this commanding officer, he was executing a mission, but he felt guilty because he sent these sailors out on this mission. And I think that's part of the skill. I guess to call it chaplain craft. I guess I don't know if there's a better word for it, but I think most of our chaplains can differentiate between the two, and mainly that big part is just listening, and for them to feel comfortable that, hey, we have confidential communication for the junior sailor and the most senior officer and your commanding officer sometimes. So I think most chaplains are fairly equipped to differentiate between those two.
One of the things that I've noticed about the illustrations that you've shared are how many of them are related to combat experience. And for the most part now, on our bases are non-combat personnel. And yet we have a higher rate of suicide than we had when personnel were in combat. So clearly, we need to pay attention to what is happening on bases that is leading to this kind of despair. And I'm interested in if you could pursue how you're equipping folks as they're working with people that are principally on a base, are not in harm's way with an enemy, at least at this point. Everyone has to be prepared for that. But clearly there's something going on that is not arising from the lingering, perhaps lifelong effects of an experience in combat. Could you please talk about how you're equipping your chaplains to be attentive to what some persons indicate are more often shame-based or certainly not combat sources for moral injury that can be severe?
Yeah, I think, if I may, on this one, there's a broader systemic issue that we need to take into consideration. It's not just what happens after they enter the military. So right now, at least in the Army, particularly with behavioral health, and that's one of the things that from the graduate school anyway, and I think in my discussion with the SME over at our Religious Leader Academy, the entry PME course, is the fact that we have people with pre-existing trauma from life, right? Particularly in the adverse childhood experiences, ACEs. So when you look at ACEs and the scale of ACEs, when you do a survey, more than 60% of our soldiers entering the Army have multiple trauma from childhood. So that's an existing issue that they come into the military with. And then when they engage training and other issues of life, and sometimes it's more trauma on top of trauma, so complex trauma, that could be the factor to higher rates of suicide. So what we're looking at is looking at trauma-informed care, right? Because not all care is uniformly applicable to everybody, especially if you have an individual that has lots of ACEs factors from previous trauma, particularly from childhood. And I think that's an important factor to consider as well. So when we look at moral injury, yes, we're not just looking at combat, but combat experiences informs us in how we care for those who are dealing with life trauma, and especially with the attention to military sexual trauma. That is an important part of that as well.
How about the other two, Doug and Ron? How are you assisting in non-combat sources or experiences of moral injury?
The quote I was looking for earlier that I was grasping for was Joseph McDonald. It says, what is significant about combat exposure is that it raises the stakes so high and generates extreme situations so reliably. And so I think that's why we tend to roll back to combat over and over again. It's an easy framework for us in the military to understand moral injury. But I don't think there's any way to separate combat from the everyday duty that we do as well. Even when we're back home preparing for combat, that is still very much intertwined in what we're doing. And when the model that I presented earlier with my 4 steps, one of the items on there is reconnecting. One of the things that the military does is it takes whatever stable social situations that you're involved in, and on a regular basis picks you up from someplace and drops you somewhere else. And you are supposed to reform social support all over again from the ground up. And as soon as you finally got that established, it picks you up and moves you somewhere else and drops you again. And so this idea of and I think in previous generations, we had a feeling where everybody went to the BX to shop, and we went to the movie theater, and then we went to chapel on Sunday, and everybody lived on base, and there was a real community type of feel. You really got that social support from the military itself. And now I think we just have less of that. And so one of the things that I think we can do to help people with moral injuries, regardless of where they come from, is just make sure that we're building in systems where they can find support, not just from the specialist, not from the chaplain, from the mental health folks or wherever else, but that we're building in robust social support for every aspect of life, because we see over and over again that that's such an important component to people's well-being. And I think that that's a spiritual mandate as well, is that we need to surround people and take care of people in community. I think that's a huge piece of what we should be doing as chaplains in order to take best care of our personnel.
Right. Ron?
Yeah, I fully concur. I think that being connected, I really believe that what we're seeing now, if there's a spike, it's probably some result of the reaction to the lockdowns, COVID. This personally, I think we stole some proms. We stole a lot of people that depend on scholarships for sports and other things. They were robbed, and those are the people, the young men and women that we're recruiting now, or at least we're trying to recruit now. I think that's part of it, and I think that it was that being disconnected. And I think by focusing on meaning and being connected, like both of you mentioned, it's absolutely important. When it comes to rituals, I think rituals are important. I know there were some things that we were doing for a while. It's kind of a ceremony called burying the hatchet, right? Burying the tomahawk, right? It was from my understanding anyway, it was something that some of the Native Americans did after war, and it was a ritual where they literally they passed a tomahawk from each other and they buried it in the ground. It's over now. There's peace now. And it was something that was they could hold. They all touched it and they buried it. And I think that from that perspective, rituals are important. And obviously, um, rituals at church, if you're a person of faith, incredibly important. But rituals, connection, community, absolutely. Um, I think that there's a reason that there's desperation because people feel alone, right? I really think that's the spike in suicides. I think it has a lot to do again with maybe some of the the fallout from COVID, the response to COVID.
Thank you. One of the things I would appreciate there are several questions and we got about 20 minutes to go. But given the level of verified reports of military sexual trauma, which I don't think is accounted for by the valid point you raised, Mark, of coming in with various difficulties that doesn't account for then somebody being able to rape on multiple opportunities. I'm wondering, do you equip chaplains, given that this is so clearly an issue? Do you equip chaplains to respond to the experience of receptive moral injury that invariably is described to me by men and women who experience rape in the military? And if so, how do you equip them to do so?
Part of our basic leadership course, we have Fleet and Family come in, and it's co-taught with a subject matter expert in sexual assault and a chaplain. And it's I think it's a 4 hour. I think we have a 4 hour block of we teach them. Basically, we start out with what the policy is in the military, and then we get very specific to how do we help a sailor, a Marine, or a Coast Guardsman that suffered from sexual assault.
So you have a particular training for that.
We do.
Okay.
It's required.
And at what point does that come in a chaplain's training? I'm sorry, I missed that detail.
That's the basic course.
Okay.
Well, for the Army,
Okay.
and I think it's probably DoD wide, it is an annual requirement.
It is.
From coming into the military until you leave the military. It's an annual requirement to have this training, in which, and then the chaplains are specific, and it's a training requirement for, at least in the Army, Army-wide. Every single person receives the same training in terms of resources and reporting obligations. And then chaplains, we just in fact had one last month, annual requirement again, to remind us of our responsibility and what our part of the entire process is in terms of caring for those who are sexually assaulted.
Yeah, same in the Navy. It's a shorter class. It's an annual requirement. The one for BLC for us, it's longer because we're just introducing them to a lot of the ideas and the policy. But yes, sir, you're absolutely right. It's an annual requirement for all personnel.
And at least in the Air Force side, we also have an additional, if you're a chaplain, if you're a psychologist, there's different career fields that have additional items that are annual training requirements for sexual assault specifically. In addition to sitting on, we sit on a couple different boards and things where we actively are caring for and paying attention to members who have reported sexual assault or sexual abuse.
Mm-hmm. That's helpful. One of the other questions that came up was What kind of collaboration, if any, do you do with the VA on these issues of moral injury?
I'll be very open with that. We are looking for ways, but we have had opportunities. One of the issues is the VA chaplaincy is not central, right? So the VA hospitals are all on their own. I had some conversation with the former chief of the chaplain services of the VA in terms of what can we do to collaborate. And I think the DoD as well as the VA were talking at higher levels, but I'm not sure that it's really filtered down to the local level much.
So we went out, this was a few years back. I went to the Durham VA and just visited with some of the chaplains there, and we swapped some ideas and things, but really had to happen at a tactical level. There wasn't a higher form that was collaborating at, but obviously great partners for us in terms of thinking about this issue in a way that other people just aren't. So if there are VA contacts on the line who would like to chat, I am all ears for figuring out how we continue to collaborate.
One of the questions that has come up in the chat is whether folks can be in touch with you following this webinar. And if you give permission to that, you can let me know and we'll make that available on the site. What questions might you want to ask each other? I have some more questions, but I want to see if you have questions for one another.
I think for Chaplain Lee, so the Army just does training in such a much more focused way and time length way than I think the Air Force is able to accomplish. I know that you're a bigger service than we are, but what do you think that focus on training as we're here at the Air Force Schoolhouse? What's that focus on training? How do you get those commanders who need those chaplains to let them loose to come get really good training?
Can you clarify that question? I'm not sure if I'm really understanding the question.
No, that's okay. At least for our side of the house, in the Air Force, a lot of times we get some pushback from commanders for training, but I know the Army does a great job of getting bunches of chaplains through lots of courses. What do you think it is about your success towards getting training, whether it be on moral injury or any of the other items that you guys get taken care of?
Yeah, thank you. I think fundamentally it's the difference in which we're structured, right? The Army, much like the Navy, is when you go over to the green side, is that we are at the battalion level and we're embedded, we're part of the unit. So the commanders from the battalion level on higher, the commanders are looking at us as part of their staff officers and that bring specific unique skill sets to care for their soldiers. So when we address the commander in that every other specialty that's on their staff, they get annual training and they get other kinds of training to become more proficient in their jobs. Same thing with us. Then as chaplains, we need to continue to get education and training, not only from the chaplain corps, but from the behavioral health. I went through TEN, traumatic event management, combat operation support training, all of these. And so the commanders are like, go get the education, because then you're going to be a better chaplain for us. I think that's the fundamental difference in our services, at least for the Air Force and the Army.
Ron, did you want to say something about this before I have another question to ask?
No, I think that's absolutely right. I think it's just the way that we're organized at the unit level. I think that makes a big difference.
One of the questions that I like for us to talk a bit about is, how do you help chaplains become reflective about their own experiences of moral injury and how to cope with those, perhaps seek help for that, but to be attentive to how it can affect them?
I want to jump on this one. So there are a couple of things that we do in our CPE program, which also belongs to the graduate school. We make all the residents attend the moral injury course. So the moral injury instructor actually comes out to the 3 different CPE sites that we have in the Army, and the residents go through that course, in which not only are they learning about how to help other people, and same thing with when they attend the moral injury course at Fort Jackson. We, as I said earlier, we spend some time in asking the question of chaplains, what are the moral injuries of their lives, right? So we reflect on that. And over the course of CPE, particularly, they start thinking about, okay, how have they experienced moral injury and how is that affecting their pastoral care? So it's a bit more prolonged in the CPE program, but even when they come for the 40-hour course at Fort Jackson, or if we take that on the road, if you will, what we do is help as they are identifying ways in which they have experienced moral injury. Then we're also then equipping them towards the end through ritual, as we talk about different practices of how to help others with their moral injury. They're also getting things for themselves. And again, most importantly, part of that process of healing is the community. So then they're able to find one another to talk and process with one another about their moral injury. And then we provide network for them in wherever installation that they might be able to connect with one another and continue that process, because we have CPE trained chaplains as well as family life trained chaplains, marriage and family therapist chaplains, who are at every Army installation that can help deal with those issues and provide ongoing care for the chaplains who are dealing with their issues.
I would say one of the items too that we do is we really want to focus, or I really want to focus specifically on normalizing the idea of morally difficult choices in our world and how we should struggle. I just wrote an article not too long ago about that's soon to be published here called Moral Injury, a Necessary Good. And that understanding that the ability to be morally injured, to look at a situation that has no clean right answer and to make the best one possible, and to walk away from that experience feeling like I did the best that I could in that situation, but I still carry some grief, or I still carry some loss, or something that impacts me and may impact me for a very long time, but there is a way to process this and a way to walk through it. And I think if you frame moral injury not as something that makes you inherently broken, but that instead is an opportunity for your moral soul to find clarity and to speak and to see the world around you in its brokenness and to respond to it as a real human being, that should be part of a good generalized work that any person, and especially a chaplain, should be able to do in their life. There will not be hopefully anyone sitting in any of our classes that has never made difficult moral decisions. And so I think we can connect with them on that level. And exactly as Chaplain Lee said, once you have given them tools for walking through their own moral injury, all of a sudden they've got something that they can then apply to the people that they're serving as well.
I see that I could see your point about agential moral injury. Receptive moral injury would, of course, be different in terms of the multiple experiences that military personnel have told me, including chaplains, about being on the receiving end of someone they should have been able to trust, and that trust is then broken. So it strikes me that also is an experience to prepare chaplains, because it does happen to chaplains, that kind of betrayal.
I do think one of the interesting things about moral injury is often, even when it's been receptive, it's happened to them. If you ask folks who have done the hard work of processing, would they go back and change it? Often their first response is yes, but then they think about it for a moment or two. And if they have, like I said, done the hard work to process, and if it is, like, there are some things that are just so terrible that you may never be able to fully process. But folks who have done some wrestling, even with some of the most horrendous things you can possibly think of, do find that there is some post-traumatic growth that has occurred and something inside of their own soul that has been honed or developed. And that in its of itself is a difficult thing as well, but can do that reflection and go, I wish it didn't happen to me, but I'm not sure I would go back and change it. And so there is something really interesting about these moral quandaries that we find ourselves in. Even something that is meant to hurt us can somehow, there might be some benefit to be obtained from it, even if it is just our own reliance on ourselves to be able to figure out a way forward from that place.
Well, there might be some illustrations of that. I'm also thinking about even chaplains who've told me about experiences of being raped, for example, and I don't think they found it an instructive experience. I don't mean to be caustic about that. It's just
no. I wouldn't
resonated,
suggest that. No, I absolutely
No, I know,
understand
I
that. There are
realize you
some
weren't getting that, but
situations. Yeah, there are
that
some
is a
situations that I'm not sure are that there may be places to find redemption in, but I have been surprised at stories that I've been told where, and one in particular, where someone's family member was murdered and how they found growth from that place completely off guard to me. But I do wonder if part of the human experience is being able to suffer through incredible pain and finding the resilience to face the next day, and what that says about that person, and something I think we can recognize and encourage, if that makes sense.
Yes, certainly. I get that. Let me make sure, Ron, you have a chance to respond to that question.
Yeah, going back to the question, I think that again, going back to their supervisors taking care of chaplains and reinforcing the idea of self-care. That's part of self-care or self-maintenance. We maintain everything. We maintain weapons, vehicles, ships. Human maintenance is incredibly important. And I think that as supervisors, as you get to know your people and you develop trust in them, that just either listening to them or getting them someone to talk to, that cathartic ventilation helps. It really does. And I think again, chaplains are unique in that sense of we can hear anything and it doesn't go anywhere, which is really important. And I think whether you're a chaplain or another service member, that's important. And again, I think I think the responsibility is really on the leaders of that part of this, taking care of their service members.
One of the helpful questions that we have about 5 minutes, and this is a question that raises it's related to perhaps working with some of our older veterans who are veterans of Vietnam, but also those who have come home from Afghanistan and are struggling with the character of those two wars and the ways in which we left them. And that kind of those experiences of moral injury, and I'm wondering if this may be more of a VA experience, but I'm wondering, you would have some folks who've come home from Afghanistan. What's your sense about responding to preparing chaplains to do that, but also chaplains themselves who may have some sense of shame, perhaps, or a gentle sense of moral injury from leaving those contexts?
I'll speak to that. I think that I've had discussions, and I think that the important thing to remember is regardless of those two wars and how people perceive what happened in those two wars, to know that, especially for chaplains and RPs, that your mission was there for people. Mm-hmm. Your mission was there for the men and women serving in a difficult place, and to remind them that that's why you were there. You were there to serve. You were called to this in ministry, and you did what you were supposed to do, and to remind them of that. That's what I shared with the folks that were having some issues, especially with the withdrawal from Afghanistan.
Mhm.
Yeah. I've had my own reactions as well as friends' reactions to the withdrawal from Afghanistan. And I think what really comes down to is there's a lot of anger, there's a lot of grief. And even during the wars, it was the question of what the heck are we doing here? I mean, and to be really frank with the language, so what the hell is our mission, right? So there's a lot of that anger and the question, and that's part of the moral injury. And I think kind of going back to what Chaplain Kennedy offered is as we're able to help them process that, to normalize their reactions, but process, okay, well, at the end, was there some good, right? To Chaplain Lumpkin's point, not all trauma, not all moral injuries, something that eventually people can say, yeah, it would benefited my growth. But oftentimes there is that element, okay, was there some good? And did we do some good? And did we do the mission that we were called to do? And okay, we can be angry, we can be sad about it, but my participation in that hopefully was some good that came out of that. And that is an important part of that process of healing and growth.
Mhm.
And I do think too that as long as the mission continues, it was very easy for men and women to get on planes and go back and do the same thing over and over and over again. But now that the mission is over, it is time for reflection and deep reflection. And what I don't want to do, I do think that there is often growth associated with moral injury, but there is also a messy middle where we must abide for a while, where we must stay in that space to process. And so I'm not quick to want to dismiss guilt. I'm not quick to trying to find where the good might be, but that there is this middle space where we must rest for a while until we can sort out right and wrong, good and bad. And when we're so close to that space, it is hard to do. And I think that is why we do see veterans showing up 10, 20 years after an event, ready now to process that maybe they couldn't get into at an earlier time frame, because there just isn't the space to do that yet, or to be ready to make those judgments.
Right. That's very helpful. And I think it's also relevant for religious leaders when those veterans are back, if they participate in a faith community, as well as if they're in a VA setting, for example, that may well be true. That's one of the things we're going to focus on the end of November with our Veterans Day. It'll be late in the month, but the consequences for folks that are home from the Korean War and the Vietnam War are older veterans and living with memories they didn't feel safe to share for different reasons when they came home. I want to thank you three very much for this experience, for your willingness to be candid and so thoughtful and to share as you have. We've come to the end of this time, and I think you've indicated that you are willing for folks to have your email contact. Am I right about that? We will post that then on the site so that people that want to follow up with you are able to do that. And I want to thank you for your willingness to be present with us in this time. I know it was helpful, and it will be up in for you to also tell your own troops, this will be available within a week to 10 days on the website and stay there for the future. So I hope that'll be helpful for everybody.